Hey everyone, welcome to Curtin Call. I'm Kevin Curtin. I'm here today at the world famous Berklee School of Music in Boston, Massachusetts, with a very special guest, Dr. Susan Rogers. It's great to be here, and Dr. Susan Rogers teaches music production and engineering here at the school. And from 1983 to 1988, Susan worked alongside the legendary Prince as an engineer and audio technician on some of the greatest albums of all time. It's truly an honor to be here today with Susan, and I just wanted to also say after that period of time, which we'll get into as well on the show today, Susan also worked with the likes of David Byrne, Barenaked Ladies, and many others. So I just want to say thank you, first off, for being here today. And, let's get right into it. So, do you recall how old you were when you became fascinated with audio engineering and electronics?
Well, first, let me say thank you, Kevin, for
Thank you.
inviting me
It's a
to
pleasure.
participate in this conversation. I'm looking forward to
Very
it.
good. Very good.
Thank you for your interest. I loved, like many people, I loved records as a child.
Yeah.
And, when we had that big vinyl,
Yeah.
we got that big canvas, you can do what children do with cereal boxes or
Yeah.
with their bedspread or whatever. You just stare at it. So
Yeah.
listening to the record and staring at it, the front and back, and imagining what it was like in the studio. Early memories of being 6, 7, 8, 9 years old,
Yeah.
and loving records, loving the radio at a
Yeah.
very early age. I'm
Yeah.
too young to know that there were careers in it.
Right.
I loved it since childhood.
Yeah. So, growing up, did you have any favorite engineers or producers?
I didn't know what an engineer or a producer was. When I was 8 years old, I had a Sonny and Cher record.
Yeah.
And it had pictures of the personnel and the studio on the back.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah.
there was a picture of the engineer. I don't remember his name, but it said he was so skinny he had to run around in the shower to get wet. And it stands out because I remember thinking, people have these resonant frequencies where something just kind of rings your bell, and it
Yeah.
made me think, whatever that is, I'll bet that's cool. I
Yeah.
didn't really get the names of engineers until I started looking for women's names, and I would
Okay.
notice Leslie Ann Jones, and I would
Mhm.
notice Peggy McCreary, and of course I knew Eddie Kramer and
Yeah.
Glenn Johns and folks like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, can you take us through in a nutshell, because I know it's quite a story, your journey from studying this art and science to eventually getting paid to do it full time?
It wasn't planned. It wasn't pre-planned. If I had planned it, I would have it would have sounded impossible. But
Yeah.
I was living in Orange County, California. That's where I'm from, in Anaheim, and there was no money in my family for college, so
Mhm.
I didn't have the kind of upbringing that would allow me to think this is what I want to be and then go be it.
Right.
Further complication was I was married. I got married when I was 17 years old. It was
Mhm.
an ill-fated marriage. I should never have done it. But
Yeah.
at age 21, I had some problems to conquer. I needed to get out of that very bad marriage. I needed to somehow get to Hollywood where records were being made.
Right.
And then I needed to see what could I do to contribute records
Sure.
coming into fruition. And I had zero experience and zero connections. but I managed it. I had a roommate who wanted to make records as well. She, unlike me, could afford to go to school. She went to a non-existent, well, now it existed then, it doesn't exist now, a
Yeah.
school called the University of Sound Arts in Hollywood.
Okay. Yeah.
I couldn't afford to go there, but she got me a job as the receptionist.
Yeah.
And as the receptionist, I could hear people talking about record making. I could hear what the teachers had to say. One teacher said to a student, if you want to have a job, become a maintenance tech. So I thought, I want a job, I'll become a maintenance tech.
Yeah.
And that's when I began purchasing the books that would teach me what I needed to know.
Mhm.
Modern recording techniques,
Yeah.
first edition, and I started studying electronics and acoustics and magnetism and studio design. That got me started
Yeah.
until I got my first job at Audio Industries in Hollywood,
Okay.
and they supplemented my training.
Yeah. Now, what point did you go from that to working at Crosby, Stills and Nash's studio?
I started with I started on my journey in January of 78.
Yeah.
I got my job with Audio Industries in October of 78.
Okay.
And I was with them through 79 and 80. I believe it may have been early 81 when
81.
Crosby,
Okay.
Stills and Nash who owned a studio called
Right.
Moody Records in Hollywood, asked me if I'd join them full time. Their equipment was MCI. That was the kind I was trained to service and repair. And it broke down a lot, and they asked if I would work for them, so I did. That was probably, I think, early 81.
Yeah. So what was that experience like working around those guys? Because obviously they also put out a lot of great music at that time. And
I had had their records since I was young. I had been a fan of Stephen Stills in particular since Buffalo Springfield.
Right.
I remember being 9 years old and listening to the long version of Bluebird and in the backseat of the car on FM radio and realizing, that blues was just, another one of those times in childhood where where you recognize this seems familiar to me, even though I'm encountering it for the first time. It just feels right. So I've been a fan for a long time, and working for them was my first opportunity to actually watch sessions in progress. Prior to that, with Audio Industries, I was a service technician. I went on service calls and I repaired tape machines and consoles. But now I have this full-time job that will allow me to fill in for the assistant engineer when he's busy, and I can watch musicians in the studio. I can watch producers, watch engineers. I can understand on a deeper level the world of record making. I'm still not privy to important conversations, but I'm closer to the world of record making in this position.
So this was really the first time that you kind of started to become fascinated with the whole studio experience, probably, right?
I'd been fascinated with it from before I ever got to see it. But this was the first time that I actually was experiencing reality outside of my imagination.
Gotcha.
And I was measuring the distance between what I imagined it was like and seeing what it actually was like. This would probably be a good time to raise the question of gender because there were no women technicians. By no, I mean there were one or two, maybe three or four.
Wow.
In the world, you just didn't see women technicians, and we were even fewer in number than women engineers, and we never saw them either. That said, as a young woman, I did not feel excluded from the environment. I felt like if I could do the job, I'm more than welcome. But I worked really hard to do the job.
So even before you started working for Prince, you were a fan, right? Before you even. Take us through that, because a lot of people sometimes maybe they don't know the artist, and so you had been a fan prior to working for Prince. So what was kind of your experience before working with him? What albums were you listening to? Were you a collector? Were you?
Well, I've always loved R&B, soul music. I was never as big a fan of the Beatles and the Stones as I was of James Brown and Sly Stone. Later in the 70s, it was Al Green. I mean, that just was the street I lived on, to use Prince's term for it. That's just what I liked. Sly, especially when I was a kid. Sly was my guy. So in 1978 in Los Angeles, there were two radio stations that played mostly soul and R&B. One was KACE, and the other was owned by Stevie Wonder. It was KJLH. Kindness, joy, love, and happiness. And I could drive around going to service calls, and at night and on the weekends, I could listen to those two stations, and I heard everything that was being played in R&B and soul and funk and dance music at that time. So I had, being LA, I had a deep awareness of who was happening. I will never forget the very first time I ever heard Prince. I think it was Soft and Wet. I was on an LA bus, the rapid transit system on Sunset Boulevard. It was in front of Hollywood High, and there was a kid on the bus who had a boom box, and he was playing the radio. And that song came on, and I was on my way to work, and I remember thinking, whoever that artist is, I need to find out who that is, because that is amazing. And it turned out it was Prince. I heard the song again on the radio. I became a fan then. And I started buying his albums, of course. I saw him play live on the Dirty Mind tour at Flippers in Los Angeles. It was a roller skating rink, a former roller skating rink.
That was a great
There was
album.
A club. This club was now on the corner of Santa Monica Boulevard and La Cienega. It maybe held 250 people, maybe, maximum. fairly small club, but I saw him play on that tour.
Now, was Rick James on that tour too, or was that just?
The show I saw at Flippers did
Yeah.
not feature Rick James. I
Okay.
think it was a one-off, a standalone show.
Yeah.
I know that he toured with Rick James
Right,
at that
right.
time, but I saw just Prince and his band.
Wow. So how was that experience?
It blew my mind.
Blew your mind.
It was exactly what I
Wow.
wanted in music.
Yeah.
It was art music because they were pushing the boundaries of fashion.
Mhm,
It was the soul funk R&B that I loved. It
Yeah.
was great musicianship. There were these incredibly hot looking people on stage. It was Prince and Des and Andre and it's
Right.
Lisa and it was incredible.
Yeah.
I was I mean that just completely rocked my world.
Yeah. So eventually you get the call or you find out. How did that all come about? You know, getting the call or seeing in the paper. Or...
Oh, that was a fabulous alignment of the stars. But
Okay.
as it turns out, I was working with Crosby, Stills and Nash, and I was happy that
Yeah.
it was a good gig. But Prince had just come off the 1999 tour,
Yeah.
and he was about to complete the
Mhm.
Purple Rain record. He'd already started recording some tracks, but
Yeah.
he had the Purple Rain movie and album to finish, and he decided that he needed an audio technician working for him full time who had more experience than his current technician.
Okay. Gotcha.
He asked his management, Cavallo, Ruffalo, and Farnoli, to find him a technician from New York or LA, somebody really experienced. Cavallo, Ruffalo, and Farnoli went to Westlake Audio in Hollywood. They put out the call. Glenn Phoenix from Westlake asked his technicians, do any of you guys want to go work for this guy Prince?
Yeah.
And my ex-boyfriend, John Sacchetti, who was the tech at Westlake, said, well, not any of us, but my girlfriend, Susan, that would be her dream job. So John told me about the job, and I said, well, then... that's my job. Prince's search is over because I'm perfect for it. I figured I was perfect because I was an experienced technician. This was 1983, the summer of 83.
Yeah.
I'd been at this for 5 years. I knew my stuff, and I was a Prince fan.
Yeah.
And I wanted that job more than anything. So Stephen Farnoli interviewed me, and he said, yeah, you'll do. Pack your bags. And I packed my bags, and I went.
Wow. So this was really a dream come true.
It was the dream come true. If anyone had asked prior to that, okay, write down your fondest wish on a piece of paper, it would have said to work for Prince.
Yeah. So before you went out there, I mean, were you nervous?
I was apprehensive. Because I was leaving everyone I'd ever known. And I was leaving California and I was going to Minneapolis.
To the cold.
Yeah, I didn't worry about the cold so much, but I worried about will I be good? Will I be good? Will I be good enough? Everyone worries about that, but I had no one to fall back on. This is me taking on the responsibility of being the tech for really big, important artists in Minneapolis. No support system. I can't just go next door to the tech, who lives next door, which is the case in LA, and say, "Hey, buddy, do you have a 5-volt voltage regulator?"
Yeah.
Which in LA you can do.
Right.
You can go to the grocery stores and you can buy, 1/8-inch mini plugs.
Yeah.
But you couldn't in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
So I had that apprehension.
Right.
But I had the moxie of youth, and so I did it.
So you get to Minnesota, Minneapolis, and it's the first place you go to the Kiowa Trail House for actually.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, at that time, there was no Paisley Park. It hadn't been built yet. It was a gleam in Prince's eye.
Yeah.
But he had this home on Kiowa Trail in Chanhassen.
Yeah.
Downstairs in the basement level was where the master bedroom was. And across the hallway from the master bedroom was a smaller bedroom that was a room like the one we're sitting in now. It was just a control room. That was his studio where he was doing a lot of work. It had a tape machine, a console, big speakers on the wall.
Yeah. And I saw recently there was an interview, I think, where you talked about hearing Prince play a lot of these songs before they were recorded.
Yes.
So what was that like? I mean, just being in another room and hearing, upstairs Prince playing, whatever it was on the piano or...
So I'd be downstairs in the studio repairing something or installing something, and the ceiling above me was where the kitchen, dining room, and then living room were.
Yeah.
And in the dining room area is where his piano, his Yamaha baby grand piano was.
Yeah.
So I could hear him upstairs on the piano going through beautiful ones and Computer Blue and just playing these pieces.
Yeah.
And he was really waiting for me to finish the wiring and the repairs and things that we're doing so he could get back down to the studio. I can't hardly describe to you what that's like, to be one floor length away from your idol who's working through these amazing pieces.
Right.
And to know that you're facilitating him making these pieces public. In other words, the recording process.
Right.
Taking these things, transferring them out of his head onto tape so they will eventually become records and go out there into the world. Knowing that I had a role in that process was thrilling and humbling. I was grateful every day, every single day.
So your first, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your first assignment or job was to work on Darling Nikki, right? To go through that tape, or
I think that was the first tape that he had me put up in the studio.
Okay, gotcha.
So once I finished my first job, the first thing I had to do when he hired me was I had to pull one console out of his home studio and install a new one that he had just purchased.
Gotcha.
So to do all the wiring, his tape machine needed some repairs. So it was about a week of working in that room before he could get any work done.
Really, it took that long?
Oh yeah, it's a lot of wiring, and I was there by myself.
Wow,
so
it's incredible.
I mean, I'm working day and night and doing the best I can, but there were things that needed repairs, and he was busy anyway because he's preparing for this movie and all this work that needs to be done, working on a script and all that. So it was a lot of work, and when we were finally ready to go, he said, "Take Darling Nikki, put up this tape," meaning thread it on the machine, push up the faders, get a mix, get a sound coming out through the speakers so that he could work on it. That was the first thing I did, and I remember standing in that room listening to this and thinking, wow, this is going to be amazing. Wait till fans hear this. Because of course I had all of his records. I knew him. I'd seen him live the 1999 tour as well as that Dirty Mind tour. I knew his work. And when I heard this, I felt so privileged. Yeah, I felt so privileged to be hearing it that soon before others. I was very excited.
So how long did that song take to really, to do the mixing and whatever you did to it? But, how long was that process?
Now, bear in mind that I was not hired to be his engineer. I was hired to be his technician. And I expected that I would not have anything to do artistically with his work, that I was just his technician. I assumed he had an engineer. And I was pleasantly surprised to discover that he didn't have one, not in Minneapolis anyway. And he expected me to just transition from being a technician to doing whatever engineering needed to be done, which I was only too happy to do. I was not qualified artistically, but compared to other engineers, it may be said that I knew the equipment as well, if not better, because I was a tech. So I understood signal flow. So Prince put me in the engineering chair and had me push up faders. Now, Prince recognized the difference. He was no idiot. And Prince also was very hands-on in sculpting his own sound. So to answer your question of how long it took, however long Prince wanted to work on it was how long it took. And he would typically do a song a day. If he's playing on, if he's playing all the instruments, he'll as long as an engineer, as long as I was there to route the signal, he can go from the drums to the bass, to the guitars, to the keys, to the vocal, to the background vocals, and then I could be helping him while he's playing. I can be EQing and adding reverb and adding delays and compression and sculpting the sound so that it is most ready for us to print to a 2-track as a final mix. Now, sometimes we'll take the tape off and he'll decide, I'm going to finish this later, or maybe I need to bring the girls in, Wendy and Lisa, Jill Jones, Susanna, to add backing vocals, or maybe I want Eric Leeds to come in and add saxophone. So sometimes we'd return to it. Other times we would just take it from start to finish in a period of about a day.
So for the Purple Rain record, I believe Let's Go Crazy, Computer Blue, and Darling Nikki were the songs that you specifically worked on, right? Or was there more?
It's probably safe to say that I worked on all of them because not all of them went right from the initial performance to the final mix.
Okay.
Especially the
Gotcha.
stuff that was done August 3rd, 1983 on the mobile
Right.
truck at the First Avenue show.
Right.
Because naturally he brought those live tapes
Yeah.
back to his home studio,
Mhm.
and we did some work
Okay.
on I Would Die for You and on The
Yeah.
Bird and some of
Okay.
those pieces.
Interesting. Yeah.
We also went back and forth between Minneapolis, the
Mhm.
home studio, and Sunset Sound, where Take Me With You was done and where When Doves Cry was done. So
Okay.
not everything was done in just one gesture.
Gotcha.
I recorded Let's Go Crazy at a rehearsal
warehouse, right?
warehouse.
Yeah.
The rehearsal warehouse in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
And so essentially, those recordings took place
Right.
in the rehearsal warehouse in Minneapolis, the home studio in Minneapolis,
Yeah.
and at Sunset Sound in Los Angeles. And
Yeah.
I was a part of them to a greater or lesser extent,
Mhm.
because when I joined him, that August 3rd show had already happened. So some
Okay.
of that was already done.
Gotcha. I was going to ask you when Let's Go Crazy was being recorded, when you first heard that Dearly Beloved come on, what was your initial reaction to that? Just when you heard those first.
Well, that came together at rehearsal.
Yeah.
So he was with the band, and
Yeah.
at rehearsal he's walking through the arrangement. He's
Gotcha.
changing the arrangement right
Mhm.
there, as any band leader would.
Yeah.
Let's speed it up, slow it down. Try this part, try that
Mhm.
part, change this part. Wendy, you do this. Lisa, you do that. Matt Fink, try this.
Yeah.
And the musicians are, because they're talented musicians, adding their own spin on it.
Yeah.
I can't say that I remember at what stage he wrote the lyrics. I honestly
Yeah.
don't remember if he came in with the lyrics.
Mhm.
My memory seems to suggest to me that he did.
Yeah.
But it's also possible that we stopped,
Mhm.
took a dinner break or something. He penned the words,
Yeah.
and then we resumed.
Yeah.
I do remember quite well that after we got the track
Mhm.
and the lead vocal, he sent everyone home, and it was just the two of us.
Yeah.
And we worked late into the night, and I remember recording the guitar solo because
jeez.
that was a moment where I made my first big mistake as
Really?
Francis and playing. And he was very patient about it.
Yeah.
It was just the two of us at the console like
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
And the remote for the tape machine was right there.
Mhm.
So I'm operating the remote, and he's got the guitar. He's sitting
Yeah.
in a chair,
Yeah.
and he's playing the solo.
Right.
So he's playing the solo, and he made a mistake. So he
Yeah.
said to me, roll back,
Yeah.
and we'll punch in.
Mhm.
I said, okay. So we roll back to the top of the solo,
Yeah.
and we're playing it back. And I'm watching his hands, and he's playing along.
Yeah.
But we're listening to the output of the tape machine. We're listening to the old solo.
Yeah.
So I don't know, because I'm not experienced with him yet,
Yeah.
where does he want me to punch in?
Mhm.
I've got my finger on the record button, and I'm
Mhm.
thinking, he's playing. Does he expect me to be in record? He might want me to be in record. Maybe
Yeah.
I should record. So I just went dink, and I hit the record button. And he just stopped. And he reaches over and he hits the stop button.
Yeah.
And he said, who cued you? And I said, well, you were playing. I thought you wanted me to. And he interrupted me, and he said, roll back.
Yeah.
Watch me. I'll cue you when I want to go in.
Yeah.
Okay. And I realized, okay.
Were you sweating at that point? Were you kind of like,
Well, I was definitely thinking, okay, he's not going to fire me.
Yeah.
I'm going to live.
right?
So he's going to give me a second chance. So we rolled back,
Yeah.
and then I had my hand on the record button, but I'm
Yeah.
watching him. He's playing. He's watching me, and the cue was he lifts his head up, and when his
Yeah.
chin comes down, that
Yeah.
means on the downbeat that corresponds to his chin coming down.
Okay.
This is where you go into record.
Yeah.
And I learned ultimately that this is how we do it. We
Yeah.
got so good at it. Me watching his face as he's
Yeah.
playing, and with my hand operating the controls, that I could see it in his eyes. It was almost, telepathy.
Wow,
He
okay.
could just kind of raise an eyebrow. And okay, 2, 3, 4, in. And I would remember the previous solo he had done before. If there was a pickup or something, if he needed
Yeah.
to go in early for a pickup,
Yeah.
we just go in on the 4 and or something.
Yeah.
You just get to know one another. It's like being a musician in a way.
Yeah, I gotcha. Yeah. So when you heard that song back when it was finished, were you like, wow, this is a humdinger of a song?
Every day was a humdinger.
Every day was a
Every
humdinger.
day was excitement and
Yeah.
was thrilling. And I was aware that I was a piece
Yeah.
in a machine
Yeah.
that was operating at an extraordinarily high level. So I imagine that a gear or whatever in a
Yeah.
Ferrari or Maserati or whatever, I don't know cars. I
Sure.
don't know why I picked that analogy. But
Yeah.
imagine a part
Yeah.
in something at the highest level
Yeah.
of thing.
First class.
Right.
Right.
You're not necessarily aware that you're not necessarily aware of the part you're playing,
Yeah.
but you know that the whole itself
Yeah.
is exceptional. And so you just kind of keep up the momentum so that
Yeah.
all of you can move forward without any kinks in the machinery.
Yeah. And Computer Blue, that's another song I wanted to have you, shed a little light on, that whole experience. Because that's another, I mean, they're all great songs. There's not a bad song on Purple Rain. I mean, everyone knows that. But Computer Blue is really interesting because of the changes, and obviously when you have the piano piece come in with the guitar solo and whatnot. So can you talk a little bit about that whole, recording experience for that record and kind of...
I wish that I had vivid memories of Computer Blue the way I have of Let's Go Crazy.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to disappoint you, your audience, and myself by not having more specific, vivid memories.
No, it's fine.
Bear in mind that was 34 years ago now, and it was a really fast-paced life.
Yeah.
So I don't have those specific memories that the way I do of Darling Nikki and the way I do of Let's Go Crazy and other pieces.
Yeah.
I have more powerful memories also of sequencing the album and of being finished with it and of recognizing it and hearing it for the first time as a side A and a side B.
Yeah.
And I have memories of putting pieces on the album, sequencing them on, and then taking them off.
Yeah.
And memories of making edits to shorten pieces and to decide, okay, this one needs to be longer. The sequencing, for example, if I may, involves, when you're going to sequence a record, back in the days of vinyl, you've got a side A and a side B, and it's like telling a story that's in two parts.
Yeah.
So the opening song on the record is going to introduce the topic. Here's how this is going to go, people.
Yeah.
But then, when you go from the first song to the second song, there has to be, like editing a movie or something, you have to decide at what point are we going to leave this scene and introduce a new scene, and how much time are we going to give our listeners to get acclimated to this new piece. So Prince put a lot of time and care in the sequencing of an album. We would listen back to a song, and I'd be standing at the tape machine with a grease pencil, which would mark the tape, and he'd be sitting next to me, and we'd be counting 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4. He'd raise his head, and then boom, that's where the mark would go. Where the mark went on the I'd find the nearest beat, and then I'd make a hard edit, razor blade editing, and we put in the head of the next song and play it from there, listen back to it, and just ultimately when it was done, you sit in the control room and you listen to side A and side B, usually with the lights down, and you're hearing your album for the first time and deciding, is this it? Is this what's going to go out there in the world? I seem to have a memory, and I could be wrong, but I seem to have a memory of at some point putting Moonbeam Levels on Purple Rain.
Really?
And then taking it off. Because we put Moonbeam Levels on a couple of times. I seem to have a memory. To the best of my recollection, we put it on Around the World in a Day, and to the best of my recollection, we even tried it on the Under the Cherry Moon, the Parade album.
Gotcha.
But it was never quite right, and that was always disappointing to me because I love that song so much. So at certain points in time, the record might be different before you ultimately decide this is it. This is side A and side B.
Yeah. So when you heard the whole thing finished, what was that like for you? I mean, just to hear everything back, complete.
Sure as hell, a lot of pride at having been a part of something that felt like it was great. A great anticipation for other fans like myself, because I'm still his fan. I can't wait until other fans hear this. The fans are going to love this. This is going to be great. I was too inexperienced and too naive to imagine what the tour would be like. I was too naive.
And the movie, right?
Certainly, I'd never been around anything like an artist making a semi-autobiographical movie that accompanied an album. I'd never seen anything like this before, but I knew as a Prince fan, and having come from the world of rock and Crosby, Stills and Nash and an older era of rock and roll, that I had put my money on the right horse, that this artist that I had loved 5-6 years back was an artist that was worth loving, that this guy was important,
Hmm.
and that this record might be even greater
Yeah.
than the great album that had preceded it in 1999.
Right.
That this was a further development in his artistry
Yeah.
that was going to help tie together
Hmm.
Dirty Mind and Controversy in 1999
Yeah.
and advance his art in a way that was going to be welcome.
Yeah.
I hoped, I suppose, that it would attract more of a rock crowd.
Yeah.
Because all of us who were
It
into
changed the
soul
world.
and R&B, yeah, we wanted
Yeah.
those the rock kids
Yeah.
to think he was cool too.
Sure. And behind us, we have all of the albums here that Susan has worked on, and there's probably a couple that are missing, but Purple Rain is on the left here, and we'll talk about some of the other ones here as well. So I have to ask, do you have a favorite memory from the Purple Rain recordings and just that whole experience for you? Do you have like a favorite memory?
Oh, well, there were a lot of memories.
Yeah.
I was so immersed in it as a facilitator of really intense work that needs to be done that I didn't perform the cognitive process of analyzing what it all meant. Some of my colleagues at that time did a better job than I, but because Prince spent so much time recording, I was with him comparatively a lot longer. My days were 24 hours long, and my nights were 4 hours long. I didn't get much sleep.
Yeah.
Sleep is important. This sounds like a long preamble, but it's important that I say it. Sleep is important for consolidating memories and things like that.
Oh, okay.
So let me just say
Yeah.
that the things that come to me were the rather extraordinary moments that were either funny or just insightful or whatever, but they weren't necessarily the most important moments. The most important moments happened while I was so deeply involved in it, I wasn't analyzing it.
Got it.
So there were things like, this is a memory that I'm fond of because it helped me realize I think I'm starting to know Prince. I think I get him.
Yeah.
It was when we were at rehearsal and Steve Farnoli was in town. Prince is one of Prince's managers. And Prince asked Steve, where's the band? We'd been taking a break. And Steve says, they're just changing into their costumes. They'll be right back. We were going to do a dress rehearsal for a scene in Purple Rain. And I thought, uh-oh, that sounded like a mistake to me. And Prince interrupted Steve and he says, those are not costumes. Those are clothes. And I understood, yeah, I think I knew that. I knew that. Like, you don't refer to Prince's... He's not wearing a costume. This is who he is. That was an important
He had a style
moment.
of his own.
Yeah. Moments like that. The first time I ever saw him in tennis shoes, I remember thinking, this is weird. Because he didn't wear tennis shoes. Prince wore high heels and his hair was done.
Even in the studio, did he dress down or was he kind of wearing what he would wear?
What you see on these album covers, that's what he wore. I remember a funny moment. He was in such a good mood around that time. I remember a funny moment. He was just about to walk onto the rehearsal, the stage space. Really, it just was a piece of carpeting on the floor with a couple of risers. But anyway, he was about to walk over to the mic, and two people just from two sides of the room called his name simultaneously. So I think it was one of the band members said, "Hey, Prince," and then someone from the back of the room said, "Hey, Prince," and he kind of did one of those double takes, and he goes, "I think I'm famous." And it was just funny. I remember he just seemed so happy, and I remember being happy for him and thinking, you are famous, and you're going to be even more famous, and it's going to be great. Those kinds of moments, those little human moments were great.
And I was going to ask, obviously you spent a lot of time with him in the studio. What was he like in the studio? Was he fun? Was he more, strict? And, what was that kind of experience? I mean, you talked a little bit about it before, but could you kind of shed a little bit more light on that?
I'd like to suggest...
Yeah.
This is just a theory, so that means it's up for debate. But my personal theory is that Prince's was his most true self
Yeah.
in the studio.
Okay.
So there's the Prince we saw on stage. There's the man who you have to bring certain things to the table when
Yeah.
you're on stage. There's the man we saw taking interviews, which everyone knows by now he was uncomfortable with.
Yeah.
There was the man that people knew as a business partner, his record company, his management. They had business meetings with him.
Yeah.
There were his friends. He was the band leader that his bandmates knew.
Yeah.
And he was, of course, the lover, he was the intimate partner of his girlfriends. But when he was in the studio, he didn't really have to answer to anybody because there was no producer there.
Yeah.
And all he needed was an engineer to keep the ball rolling.
Yeah.
And he could work by himself. Most of the Purple Rain album represents an extraordinary young genius playing all these instruments himself, which is hard to fathom now.
Yeah.
I'm 60 years old, and I think that kid was 24 years old when he made
Just
this
unbelievable.
record. It's unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
So, to answer your question, Prince would come in a good mood, a bad mood, or a neutral mood, but he'd basically get right to work and be quiet for the most part. It was boom, 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 boom. It was the genius in his laboratory.
Yeah.
It was the artist in his studio creating. He needed silence. He needed concentration. He needed the world to be non-existent. He needed the phone to not ring. He needed people not coming in and out. He needed to create.
Yeah.
He needed his engineer, me, or whoever else was working with him, to be quiet, unobtrusive, and to have an extraordinary level of stamina.
Yeah.
To be relentlessly self-sacrificing. It doesn't matter if I'm hot, cold, tired, thirsty. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I'm sick, well, having a birthday or an anniversary, or if I've got a family at home who's ill.
Didn't matter.
That didn't matter.
Right.
So those of us who could be that for him could allow him to just be the working man that he was. That's what it was like for him. He was somewhat extraordinary in that regard. Most records are made more collaboratively. There are more people working all together. There's a producer, an engineer, an artist, and there's an ongoing dialogue that runs through it. Not in his case. It's silent, one-on-one, man and instrument working.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask, what was the greatest thing you learned from Prince, just working with him? Or maybe a couple, maybe not the greatest, but the greatest takeaway, maybe, you know?
This is going to sound a little funny.
Yeah.
Courage.
Courage.
I almost said self-discipline because he had plenty of that.
Yeah.
The guts that he needed to be who he was, and do what he did, the sacrifices he made to keep going for as long as he did, to sacrifice a personal life meaning a quiet, intimate one, like most people have.
Yeah.
To be a star requires great sacrifice from a person. There's so much of everyday life that you give up. There's so much of your humanity that you must give up.
Sure.
It's a sort of a pact with the devil, so to speak. He had the courage to work when he was sick, when he was sad, when he was tired, when he didn't feel like it, when he was confused, when he didn't know what to do, when he was unsure of himself. He always did his job. He always showed up.
Yeah.
And he showed leadership, and he showed guts
Yeah.
to the best of his ability.
Yeah.
She was well aware he was
You gotta
all
love
wrong,
that, you know?
but I learned more about that from him. Now, from other people, I learned how to be a record producer. I learned that from Tony Berg.
Yeah.
I learned what music is from Tommy Jordan and Greg Kurstin. I learned other lessons, how to be a band leader from the Barenaked Ladies.
Yeah.
I learned how to be, I got to observe how to be a great businessman from David Byrne. But from Prince, the biggest thing I learned, I think, was courage.
Yeah. That's great. So, up next, we have this lovely album here, Around the World in a Day. I don't know if everyone can see it, but hopefully you can. This is obviously a major and drastic departure from the sound of Purple Rain, but brilliant in its own right. What was this experience like recording this album and some of the songs on this record for you?
That record is a little bit closer to my heart because I participated in all of it, because that was not the case with Purple Rain, because I was joining him in the middle of it, but I heard every note of Around the World in a Day. It still was prior to Paisley Park being built, so we did a lot of it at the rehearsal warehouse. It was a period of flux, of change for Prince. He was smart enough to know, I believe, that everything goes in cycles, and after this tremendous peak of Purple Rain, that it was time to shift gears and start working his way back toward a second peak, which was going to come at some distant point. He was smart enough to know the history of music and to know that Around the World in a Day would not, could not, should not exceed Purple Rain in sales. I think he recognized that. It's the perfect time to make a transition record to show a new facet of himself as an artist. And he did. He abandoned purple, as you can see from the album cover. He chose all the colors of the rainbow. He didn't put himself on the cover. It's a cartoon drawing.
Great drawing, by the way. Whoever,
it is. It's beautiful.
Really.
He opted for a broader worldview in his lyrics. You know, Around the World in a Day is talking about this place. You can call it Paisley Park, but it includes an us, a we. Purple Rain was about him. This is about us. So it also incorporated rock textures and sounds and rock influences. He knew now that he had the ear of more white listeners than he had ever had before. So he was going to try to appeal to those listeners. And he also recognized that this is a time for him to explore his artistry anew. So making that record involved more experimentation than I was used to seeing, and involved some really crude recordings. Oh yeah, crude in the sense of the recordings that we did at the warehouse. It was a pretty crude signal path. It was rehearsal mics, which tended to be the cheaper mics. This isn't the good stuff. We're in a non-acoustically treated environment. We're in a warehouse with these inexpensive mics that are feeding a splitter snake, which means it takes this weak little mic signal and sends it to two places, a recording console and a monitoring console. So this was no high fidelity by any means. I knew that I was breaking every engineering rule, and that he didn't care. This is a man who's an artist who's pushing paint around on canvas in a way that's breaking the rules.
And he trusted
he doesn't care.
And he trusted you.
He trusted himself. He knew that his artistry would more than compensate for poor signal quality. We did some of those recordings in a mobile truck because we were just coming off the Purple Rain tour. And so it was catch as catch can. We did some recordings on the Purple Rain tour in mobile recording trucks under unusual circumstances. But as long as he could keep recording, that's all he cared about.
I was going to ask, do you remember recording Raspberry Beret?
I do. At the warehouse, I also remember him turning over the string arrangement duties to Lisa Coleman. And I was so glad that he did. He had, because we were in Minneapolis at the time, he had Lisa bring in some string players, including her brother, David Coleman, on cello, the great Susie Katayama on cello, and we also brought in Novi Novog on viola. I remember Prince leaving us, which was great. He left us, and he let Wendy and Lisa it was primarily Lisa doing the conducting, but he let the three string players and Lisa and Wendy and me do that recording at the warehouse. And how great it was to work with these women that I love so much, as well as to do something that we knew Prince was going to come in and really enjoy. And he did enjoy it. I remember that Prince was forming... he had ideas for Sheila E. around that time, and that Sheila would come by the warehouse, and that there were ideas for the family as well with Susanna Melvoin. So there were recordings taking place at that warehouse in that space, and that also included Jill Jones and other artists. So it was like a parade of artists coming in and out and music being made in that warehouse. It felt like a factory for music.
You know, Raspberry Beret, I mean, there's a lot of great songs from Around the World in a Day. It's a great album. But Raspberry Beret is one of those songs, like many of his, where it takes you on this journey, and you can almost envision everything that's going on, lyric by lyric in that song, right? So, I mean, just hearing that back when it was finished, I mean, were you like, man, this is just something. special, you know.
I loved it. I thought it was going to be a hip hop song for
You did.
him.
Yeah.
I was most impressed with Condition of the Heart.
Oh, the
That
great song.
knocked
Great song.
me out.
Yeah.
Knocked me out as that
Yeah.
was coming together.
Yeah.
I was aware that things were changing with the time. Members of the time were leaving,
Yeah.
including Jesse Johnson,
Right.
which is where Old Man Johnson's farm comes from.
Oh, really?
The
Okay.
lyric of Raspberry Beret.
Oh, okay. Didn't know that. Yeah.
Yeah, I had given Prince for his birthday or something. I had given him a gift of an egg. It was a purple alabaster egg.
Yeah.
And he told me later that when he and Jesse were having a difficult conversation about Jesse's ongoing, as it turns out, lack of participation in the time. In other words, when Jesse told him he was leaving the time, Prince was holding that egg, and there was some negotiating going on. But at some point, when it became clear that it was over, Prince told me later that the egg fell out of his hand and it broke. Because he had been playing with it in his hands, and he dropped it and it broke, this purple egg.
Yeah.
That's just, that anecdote is apropos of nothing, just to say that during that time, things were shifting. People and Prince's look, his hair and his clothes and his worldview were changing. Susanna was around, and Susanna was introducing him to Led Zeppelin and more Beatles than he'd ever listened to before.
Yeah.
So you could feel the winds of change blowing in.
Yeah. And for those that haven't really listened to Around the World in a Day, it really is a great album to listen to from start to end. So if you haven't listened to it, please, at some point, check it out. Moving on, next up is another album, Parade, which I think sometimes gets overshadowed by these last two albums and just doesn't really, I don't know, for whatever reason, a lot of people don't really talk about this album, but this is another brilliant album. I mean, really. It's just another brilliant album, really.
Yeah.
So what was that experience like for you, working on this?
That was a different ball game.
Completely different, by the way, from anything he's done before.
Yes. So imagine this artist's trajectory.
Yeah.
He had his first crossover single, which is a big thing in an R&B artist's life.
Yeah. His
first crossover single was on the 1999 album,
Yeah.
followed up by this huge success of the Purple Rain record, and he won an Academy Award for the best score, or the best soundtrack, I guess it was.
Yeah.
And he won Grammys, and so there's this huge peak. Then there's Around the World in a Day, which is a change.
Yeah.
It sold 3 million records, which is no joke.
Yeah.
But compared to the 25 million or whatever it was from Purple Rain, it was seen as it being less successful. So now what does an artist do?
Yeah.
Well, this particular artist followed his the artistic scent in his nostrils and aimed to continue being an artist. He was going to serve his artistry rather than make a commercial record that would just capitalize on Purple Rain or be Purple Rain 2.
Sure.
So he again planned another movie, and this time in black and white. He, as with the Dirty Mind album, his third album, the cover, the artwork for the Parade album is again black and white. He's showing us he's first and foremost an artist.
Yeah.
That's how he thinks, and that's who he is.
And what a great album cover. I mean,
I love
what a great shot. You know?
Just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
Now, his work was taking on a more serious tone sonically. He had spent some time in the south of France preparing for Under the Cherry Moon, the movie. He he'd taken a brief vacation to Brazil with his manager, and he brought back the steel drum, and he brought back a few world flavors from France and from South America. So anyway, we did a lot of that work at Sunset Sound, where the sounds were better. This is a much better sounding record than Around the World in a Day. Prince was kind of incubated right there in Los Angeles. The album has a broader perspective. It's more connected, I would say, to the music business. It's more commercial, for lack of a better word. It is intended to accompany a story, this story that runs through the movie, but it's not as tight with that story as the Purple Rain album was to the Purple Rain movie. The changes that were going on in Prince's life at that time was, at this point, he was well aware. There was no question about his importance as an artist. I think the tensions that were happening in his life, including personal tensions as well as business tensions, would bubble under the surface of the Parade record and ultimately feed the next album, which is Sign of the Times.
Right.
But at this point, I think Prince was trying to position himself as an artist who would appeal to both North American and European audiences
Gotcha.
who liked both soul R&B music
Yeah.
as well as pop music. It was
Okay.
becoming quite clear at this point that he was first and foremost a pop artist.
Yeah. You know, another thing about this album, I feel like this is another album that you have to listen to from start to finish to really get the full experience, you know?
Yeah, I think songs like Girls and Boys, which was a single, and Kiss
Yeah.
were ideal representations of what he
Yeah.
did best.
Yeah.
Melody and pop lyrics.
Yeah.
He's not a great lyric writer in the way that Bob Dylan is, but he's a great pop lyric writer.
Yes.
And he certainly was a genius with rhythm.
Yeah.
So this record is as it continues the pop that we heard on Pop Life and
Yeah.
Raspberry Beret on the Around the World in a Day
Yeah.
record, and continues it, and it's even more pop in a certain sense.
Yeah.
His artistic experimentation notwithstanding.
Yeah, I felt it was very colorful too, musically, you know, with the strings and a lot of the different sounds that he used on this record too. Yeah.
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 I don't think it's not an ultimate Prince record. It's a
Right.
great record.
Yeah.
I wouldn't put it as it's not as important, I think, as the record that followed it.
Yeah. So next up, I don't know if you can see, but behind me here is Sign of the Times. This came out in 1987, and again, another great album cover. I mean, isn't that just a great cover? You know, it really is.
It's darker.
It is, but it's
than he
very
was
cool.
used to. Yeah, it is very cool.
You know, with the guitar on the bottom there, and the little car, and it's great. Yeah. So, I mean, this is another album. You know, again, I thought in the '80s really there wasn't a bad Prince album, but yeah, I'm a huge fan, and I don't know if you would agree with that, but Sign of the Times is probably what a lot of people consider, you know, on par with Purple Rain, or some people like it better than Purple Rain. What was this experience like recording this album and working with Prince on this album?
This one was deep because initially, fans will know this anyway, he wanted to put out a triple album.
Really?
Yeah, he wanted to, and we'd even sequenced a triple album.
Okay.
Warner Brothers would not give the green light to that. It's just too expensive.
Yeah.
It would have to be a more expensive record. Triple albums simply weren't done, and they were afraid that it would really cut into their profits.
Yeah.
It wouldn't sell as many because it would be expensive. So Prince was disappointed at not being able to do a triple record. So it was decided ultimately that it would be a double album.
Yeah.
So, as I recall, to the best of my recall, the song Sign of the Times, which became the keynote song, the anchor of that album, came about midway through the process of deciding what his next record was going to be.
Oh, okay.
So whenever an important artist, I think, whenever they make a record, they're saying, this is going to be my worldview for now.
Yeah.
These clothes, these words, these grooves, these tones, these timbres, these band members represent me today.
Yeah.
So it takes a little minute when you're doing a record to decide which of the songs you've recently written or which of the songs to be written are going to anchor that record and form the kernel, the seed of the record.
Yeah.
The song Sign of the Times was clearly, obviously, the anchor point for that record.
Yeah.
Other songs then complemented that and completed that view.
Yeah.
Sign of the Times was Prince's recognition, I think, of a number of things. This is when the revolution is now broken up. So now Sheila is joining him, Bobby Z is leaving, Wendy and Lisa are gone. He's changed his color scheme. It's now peach and black. Peach was Susanna Melvoin's, his girlfriend at the time.
Okay.
That was Susanna's favorite color, and that was he adopted that color, I think, in honor of her. And he also said, so I feel comfortable saying it, he was hoping to win back his core audience of R&B listeners, people who listen to R&B radio. And that was behind the song Adore, for example. He wanted to do a soul ballad.
What a great song.
Yeah, I love that.
One of the best songs of all time, in my opinion.
Love that song. He wanted to do more soul, and he wanted to let his R&B core audience know, I'm still me. I'm still here.
Yeah.
I think Sign of the Times was that too.
Yeah.
We hear songs like The Cross, which acknowledge
Yeah.
his religious beliefs
Mhm.
and his faith, and that was an important aspect of his life.
Yeah.
We hear Housequake. We hear songs where he obviously played with funk.
Yeah.
And funk expressions. But remember, this came out in 1987, and at this point in music's history, this is when it was clear beyond a shadow of a doubt
Yeah.
that hip hop and rap, hip hop especially, were
Absolutely.
the new wave, and that funk
Yeah.
was done.
Yeah.
And for artists like Stevie Wonder,
Yeah.
Michael Jackson, Prince, who did dance music rooted in funk and soul and R&B,
Yeah.
it became clear that they were not hip hop artists,
Yeah.
and that they would not be part of the next wave of music that would dominate ultimately the charts
Yeah.
for a long time to come.
This is true.
So Prince is acknowledging that the world is changing, the country is changing.
Yeah.
His relationships are changing, and his position in the artistic firmament is changing.
Yeah. And there's so many great songs on this album here, and I think one of my favorite stories is obviously the story that you've probably told a million times, Dorothy Parker. One of my favorite songs from that album. If you haven't heard that story, it's all over the internet. So I won't have Susan tell that story because she's told it a million times. But it's a great song, and the story behind it is really cool. So check that out. I just want to kind of circle back. And again, this is just a wonderful album. And again, another album that I believe from start to finish is just the best way to experience it, which brings me to my next question. I know this is tough, but do you have a favorite album from your work with Prince? Either working on it or just listening back? I know it's tough, but, there's got to be a favorite or one that's closest to you.
It kind of is. And the albums I did with him include these 4 that we've talked about, plus the all but one track on the Black Album that was the next ill-fated record that came out after this, or should I say didn't come out after this.
Right.
Anyway, of all of them, I honestly have to say I have a soft spot in my heart for Around the World in a Day.
Okay.
I think, for me personally, Condition of the Heart is a work of genius.
Oh, it is.
The whole album of Purple Rain is a work of genius.
Yes, absolutely.
Without
a doubt.
No question.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
Sign of the Times is a work of genius.
Mm-hmm.
But Condition of the Heart is Prince doing something he did very rarely.
Yeah.
He's telling us how he feels.
Yeah.
And because he did it so rarely, I think audiences probably didn't even recognize it when they heard it.
Yeah.
When he sings, acting on a whim is only good for a condition of the heart. When he talks about, wasn't that a foolhardy notion on the part of a sometimes lonely musician?
Yeah.
He was lonely. Because he did what he needed to do in order to protect himself to be a star.
Yeah.
You must cut off a part of your psyche to keep it alive.
Yeah.
So that you can continue to create.
Yeah.
And after Purple Rain, I think he was well aware he'd be famous from then on. And life would never
be the same.
Be normal.
Yeah.
So the people who wanted him, whether it's a dame in Paris or a woman in London or just whatever, the people who wanted him, the people who wanted to be near him, the people who spoke to him, from this point on, he would never know what they wanted.
Yeah.
And he would always have to be skeptical. And life was changing, and he'd always be a boss, and he'd always have employees.
Yeah.
And the kid that he'd known was gone.
Yeah.
The kid he'd known as himself was gone. The kid in the movie Purple Rain.
Sure.
So I think I feel a soft spot of affection because I remember him transitioning into that awareness at that time. And I remember the guy that I met going away. And a new guy coming in his place.
Yeah.
And it's hard to understand unless I went into greater detail about having observed the artist experience, the transfer that happens from being, you're pretty good, to being, you are world-class great. You will go down in history. Yeah. Watching an artist go through that process at the tender age of 25 or whatever, 26 at that time, is something to see.
Yeah. So looking back, we'll get into after, when you departed Prince, but looking back now, today, to be a part of some of the greatest albums of all time, how does that make you feel? Just kind of,
Just really fortunate. I
Yeah.
just feel really
I
fortunate.
bet,
It
yeah.
happened, as they say, success is when preparation meets opportunity. I
Yeah.
was prepared. That was no accident. I
Yeah.
had worked and studied really hard to acquire the skills and the knowledge that I had at that point, at the point
Yeah.
where he and I, our paths crossed. So I had done the preparation. I was fortunate to get the opportunity. It happened because I was in LA. It
Yeah.
would not have happened if I'd been in Missouri or someplace
Sure.
like that. He wouldn't have even found me if I'd been in Minnesota. But I was in the right place at the right time with the right skills. I was the right person for the job. I recognized that he was great from his first record.
Yeah.
A lot of the stars just sort of aligned properly, and the spotlight of attention fell on me.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I feel fortunate. I don't feel special. There was nothing special about it.
Yeah.
These are
Well,
all
you are
average,
special.
Well, these were all average things,
Yes.
but sometimes average occurs at an exceptional moment in time, and
Yeah.
so there you go.
Well, I don't think there's anything average that you or Prince did, so we want to thank you for all your hard work. So can you talk a little bit about transitioning from working with Prince to then, kind of what you did directly thereafter?
It was a tough transition,
Yeah.
because he was the one who made me an engineer and mixer. So when I left Prince, I only knew one sound. I knew how to get the sound that he wanted, but he
Yeah.
had an unconventional sound and he had an unconventional way of working.
Yeah.
Jesse Johnson was my first client. I worked with Jesse on Every Shade of Love, and
Yeah.
Jesse was a great friend and was instrumental in transitioning me into the world of how other engineers
Interesting.
work.
Yeah.
I still, however, had not observed, for all intents and purposes, other records being made the way they're normally made with a producer and an engineer.
Yeah.
And my career in the late 80s and early 90s suffered for it because I had reinvented, from my own knowledge base, I had reinvented the wheel of of sound processing out there in Minneapolis. I was just doing it because Prince liked it.
Yeah.
I didn't know what I was doing artistically.
Sure.
It took a minute, but thanks to the good clients that I had, and the good producers I was able to work with, especially Tony Berg in LA, I became accustomed to seeing how other engineers work. I learned how producers work. I learned how records get made, and I was able to bring some of Prince's methodologies, or at least his sensibilities towards sound sculpting, to other clients, and then learn from them as well. It took a minute.
So how did you get involved working with David Byrne from the Talking Heads?
I had the great good fortune to take a meeting with an A&R person at Warner Brothers Records.
Yeah.
This was in '92, and he said to me, "We were, when you're an independent record producer engineer, you take meetings at record companies, and then they play you. Well, these are the artists we have who are making records. Maybe you'd be interested in this or that."
Yeah.
And then he said to me, "You wouldn't be interested in this band because there's no money in it, but meaning, I can't afford to pay you. But just check this out." And he played a cassette, and it changed my life. It changed my career. It was Tommy Jordan and Greg Kurstin, who were known as Geggy-Ta. Greg Kurstin, who's now up, he's nominated.
One of the best producers out there. Yeah.
Yeah, he's nominated for the third time now for the Grammy for Producer of the Year. He co-wrote Hello for Adele and produced Adele's album. Anyway, at that point, he was a 21-year-old pup. And so he was the Geggy of Geggy-Ta, and Tommy Jordan was the Ta.
Yeah.
So he played me this snippet of Geggy-Ta, and I said to Kevin Lafferty, who's the A&R man's name, "On the contrary, I'm intensely interested in this. Can you introduce me to these people?" And I began a conversation with Tommy Jordan in 1992, and it's still ongoing today.
Yeah.
They were signed to David Byrne's Luwaka Bop Records.
Okay.
Luwaka Bop is just made up words, but that's the name of his record label. David Byrne had discovered their extraordinary talent, and they were about to go in the studio and make their first record.
Yeah.
Making that first record with them led to my making a record afterward with David Byrne. And again, this is someone I'd been a fan of.
Oh, yeah.
I'd had since the first
Talking
record.
Heads are great.
Talking Heads. I had seen them on tour many times. To get that call to come to New York from LA and work with David, I remember being really nervous on the plane, thinking,
"Oh yeah, I would be too. Sure.
Who the hell am I to tell David Byrne
what to do?" Right. Exactly.
to do?
Right.
And unfortunately, by the time the plane landed, I realized what the answer was. I'm a record lover.
Yeah.
I'm a fan. So what are we doing except we're making a commercial product for fans and music lovers to consume?
Yeah.
I'm a music lover. I'm a fan. As a producer, I can say, this is better than that. This didn't quite hit the mark. Try that again. What if we did this and not that? In other words, you're just informing the artist about the kind of record you'd like to consume.
Yeah.
What's so hard about that? There's
Yeah.
no way of knowing if you're right or wrong. You just do the best you can,
Yeah.
armed with whatever skills and strengths you believe you might have. It takes some
Yeah.
hubris. You have to say, yeah, I really do think this is going to be better. And then you have to be willing to, you get to stand where you said you were going to stand.
Yeah.
But that's easy enough. So he was incredible to work with, as smart and as funny as you think he is, if not better. A gentleman, a wonderful person to be around, and I learned a lot from him. It was great to work with him.
Yeah. So eventually, you get involved working and producing for the Barenaked Ladies on the Stunt album, which was a huge, huge album for them, and a couple huge singles, on that album that just at that time were, dominating the Billboard chart. I mean, it was just incredible. So how did that whole experience come about, getting involved with them?
Another happy thing. I'm very articulate.
Yeah.
I have a PhD and I can't think of a better word than thing. It was a happy event. It was a sequence of events. We had some friends in common, including a band called Odds out of Vancouver, the great Craig Northey, whom I love so much, and our friends that, on the touring circuit, you run into one another, Toad the Wet Sprocket and folks like that, and they had heard that I was good to work with, so they approached me.
Yeah.
It turns out that they approached me after I already had some records booked. I had Rusted Root coming up, and I was just finishing up on something else. I don't remember what it was. Anyway, I had only 3 weeks to give them, so I couldn't do the whole record in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Fortunately for all of us, our Prince colleague, David Leonard, great engineer, producer in his own right, also agreed to finish the record with us.
Oh, okay.
I started it. I did pre-production with them. We did the basic tracks. We did overdubs. We passed the ball to David Leonard, who finished it up with vocals and guitars, mixed the record, and then together it was released. I was working with Barenaked Ladies at a time when they were hitting their a real artistic peak. They were really hitting their stride.
Yeah.
They had sold a lot of records in Canada, and they expressed the desire to sell more records in the States.
Yeah.
There's a slightly different preference. If you were to show the overlap of U.S. preferences in our pop music and Canadian preferences, there's some overlap, and then there's some differences. So involving American producers was important to bring out kind of an R&B, soul, gospel, our U.S. roots preferences into their music, which was under the influence of a lot of music from Europe and Canada.
Yeah.
So brought that to the table, and coupled with the brilliant lyric writing and the great management of Terry McBride from Network Management, Terry helped make that record a hit.
Yeah. Just an incredible. I mean, I remember, that record just being huge at the time, and really great sounding record too. So
we had a blast. We had some difficulties though, because Kevin Hearn was ill.
Oh, okay.
And didn't know what was wrong, and was losing weight and couldn't eat.
Yeah.
And that was a concern.
Okay.
And ultimately, after the record was completed, Kevin was diagnosed with leukemia.
Oh,
Couldn't
wow.
tour with them. Greg Kirsten actually filled in while Kevin was in the hospital battling leukemia. Fortunately, he turned out okay. He turned out just great.
Yeah.
But it was a funny record. Funny record for that. There was that invisible tension that ran through it. It was a great pleasure, and the royalties from the success of that record allowed me to make a change in my professional life. It was a huge change.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about that change to your fans and viewers?
Yeah, we had a hit record, and when you're a producer with a hit record back in the old days when we actually sold millions of records, thanks Napster. So that's when we got royalty checks. You got paid for making records, and with a royalty check from a hit record, a producer is now in a position to build a studio, pay off her mortgage, or do what I did, quit her job and start a whole new career.
Yeah.
So I left the music business in early 2000, and I entered college as a freshman with the purpose of becoming a scientist.
Yeah, that's great. So what, I mean, after finishing college and obviously now you're here at Berklee, what was that experience like, going there and then obviously finishing and coming here, and now you've been here since 2008, right?
Yes, it was funny. I did 4 years of undergraduate work at the University of Minnesota. They say college is the best years of your life. I was so happy. I was in my mid-40s, and I was doing a dual major in neuroscience and psychology, experimental psychology. I loved it, loved it, loved it, loved it. Went straight to McGill in Montreal afterward to earn my PhD in a program in behavioral neuroscience. And I studied under two incredible researchers, Daniel Levitin, who wrote This Is Your Brain on Music, and Stephen McAdams. And I developed an expertise in auditory perception and auditory short-term memory. Then I didn't think I'd ever again have conversations about records and record making. But given at this point that I was 52 years old, I was obviously going to have a short career in the sciences. It made sense for me to be in a college where I can teach both my virtual PhD in engineering and production and my actual PhD in music cognition and psychoacoustics. Berkeley's the only place on earth where I can do that. So one of my happy surprises was I learned when I was away at college, I really missed musicians. Musicians was all I ever knew of the adult world. It's all I'd ever worked with. And as soon as I came back here to Berklee and was surrounded by, at that time, 4,500 musicians, I felt like I'm home.
You're home again.
These are my people, my people. I am among my people. It just felt right, compared to psychology departments and compared to, it just felt right. And these kids here are so great. They're so great, and my colleagues are, and this is a wonderful place to be. So I've got a foot in the arts. I still talk about record production and engineering with my students every day, and I've got a foot in the sciences. I have my lab just up the street on Commonwealth Ave. I perform scientific tests. I do my best to keep up with the sciences, and I teach in the sciences as well. I enjoy it.
So what is the greatest joy for you teaching and,
To be perfectly honest.
Or the most rewarding,
The most rewarding thing is to be in the laboratory and doing what I love to do, being a scientist, exploring. My question that I'm interested in is the development of the auditory pathway, the neural pathway, as a function of musical training. Auditory neuroscience is my favorite thing. And I got into sciences because after all those years in the music business, serving other people's artistry and other people's vision, I wanted to make my own. Not my own record. I'm not a musician. I wanted to have my ideas, my laboratory, my questions, my being in the zone of exploring something that is of interest to only me. Because in the sciences, there are no, people don't care. Except other sciences. This is what I wanted very badly. And when I do get the time to do that, I am the happiest. That said, our Berklee population, as well as my Berklee Online students, are so great. Having that conversation with those kids is deeply rewarding. It's deeply rewarding. It makes me feel useful, and I'm so proud of them. We're just busting buttons all over the place because these kids they're smart, they're talented, and they're great. So it's very rewarding. All those things.
So, what advice do you have for today's generation of engineers and producers?
I got a lot of advice. In a nutshell, the best thing I can tell you to do is to know yourself.
I like that.
Know the kind of working environment you like.
Know your strengths.
Right. You got to know your strengths and weaknesses. But what sort of environment do you want to work in? Do you want to work a 9 to 5? Well, then record making's not for you. You should probably be a record executive or something like that. Do you do your best thinking when people put you alone in a room and shut the door? If so, you're probably cut out to be a mixer. Would you rather sculpt sound? If so, you might be an engineer. Or are you good at shaping people, not manipulating them? I mean drawing art and drawing performances out of them. If you were to be a filmmaker, would you be a director And would you be able to read performances, or would you be a cameraman? Would you be able, be a cinematographer? Would you
Sure.
be able to frame the shot?
Mhm.
Would you be an editor? In other words, know yourself, know what your strength is, and then after you've done that, work on knowing 3 things that every professional must know. Whether you're in law, medicine, or you're in the music business, you need to know your tools and how to use them.
Okay.
So you've got to be technically adept, and you got to keep up with the magazines and all that. So know your tools and how to use them.
Mm-hmm.
Know your field. Know music, for crying out loud. You got to know the history of music. If you need a refresher,
Listen to everything.
listen to everything, but you can never know everything. There's too much.
Yeah.
So go to rollingstone.com and look at their lists of the 500 greatest albums ever made, the 100 greatest songwriters of all time,
Yeah.
the 100 greatest singles of all time.
Mm-hmm.
Know the field that you want to be a part of.
Yeah.
And the third thing is to know your discourse community. Who are
Mhm.
your people? Know other producers, know other record makers, know musicians, know our value system. How do
Yeah.
we talk? What do we look for in one another
Mhm.
that will enable us to be hired? How do we convince others that they should trust us
Yeah.
to make their record or sell their record or edit their record or whatever it is you're doing
Yeah.
for people? So know yourself, know your community, and then go to work. It's all about obstacles. A life in the arts is about a life in problem solving.
Yeah.
You have to be okay with problem solving, because you'll solve problems every day of your entire career.
Yeah.
And no 2 records are alike.
Yeah.
So you have to be okay with these challenges.
Yeah. Well, this has really been a treat. I hope everyone out there enjoys it. For this show, you can follow us on Twitter, Curtin Cole 87, Instagram, Curtin Cole 87, and we're on Facebook. You could like the page. I want to thank Susan so much. Thank you so much again for being on the show. Really appreciate it. Had a great time.
Thanks.
And I hope everyone enjoys it. All right. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Karen. It was a pleasure to be here.
Very good. Thank you again.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.